Welcome back to Sailing El Jaleo. This week, while I was preparing EJ's bottom so we could go back in the water, I came across a nasty little gremlin. When I was chipping off the old bottom paint, I discovered a portion of EJ's keel that was delaminating. So, yeah, that was a nasty, nasty surprise I wasn't expecting, but I definitely had to take care of. So we're going to take care of that this week, and I'll go over how I fixed all that. It might be helpful for someone. I guess we might as well go ahead and get right into it. Grab a drink, climb aboard, and let's get going. Hey y'all, we're only a couple days, well, about a week away from what we planned on doing, going back in the water. And I was scraping the bottom here, getting ready for hull paint, and I discovered a small section of the keel here where the fiberglass was delaminating. So I got most of it off. It might extend a little bit down over here as well, so I might have to grind a little bit more of this off, but I'm going to tuck into this and see how bad this is. Yeah, it actually does feel a little loose here, so might have some more removal to do. I guess we might as well get into it. So there you saw our small section where it was delaminating, and at first when I was scraping that, normally on the bottom paint you don't want to scrape off the bottom paint, you just want to chip off any loose areas and then paint over them again. So as I was doing that, I scraped down and I actually caught an edge of some fairing, and the fairing actually started coming up, and then I really started kind of hammering on it, and that's when I got down into the fiberglass. And I knew I definitely had a problem, so the first thing I had to do was grind it down just to find out exactly how big the problem area was, and then go ahead and end up fixing it. So I guess while I'm grinding this down, I might as well give you guys a real-time update. Today is Wednesday. We are going back in the water on Friday. Today I finished up the final bit of our painting, and as anyone knows, the closer you get to splash day, the more hectic everything becomes, and it's like, oh, I am just whipped. I think once we get in the water, we're going to head through the C&D Canal and just maybe hang out in Bohemia River for a few days, or go up Sassafras. We've never been up there, and it might be nice to check it out and just relax for a few days. I don't know if I'm getting old or what, but my back is killing me. I've got a headache. I'm just tired. As I got into the problem area with grinding, I just used my orbital sander with a 60 grit sanding disc, and I didn't want to do anything too aggressive. Now, this was not a structurally sensitive area. I consulted Frank once again, which I often do when I run into these issues, not necessarily on how to fix it, but just on what exactly is going on at that part of the boat. Now, I've owned EJ for 5 years now, but I have nowhere near the knowledge that Frank does, considering he built her himself. So he was nice enough to send me a drawing that kind of showed the different keel compartments, where the lead was located, and what I might be dealing with. So that was very handy. I'll put that on the screen here. That's a pretty interesting little drawing there. So as I started to grind it down, you know, I do have an angle grinder for doing more aggressive fiberglass removal, but here I knew it was nothing structural. It was just something that delaminated for some reason, and it was a very small area that was affected. So I just ground it down with 60 grit sanding disc. I didn't want to take off any more than I had to, because I didn't want to replace or repair a big area, and I didn't want to replace anything I didn't have to. After sanding off the original barrier coat and all of the fairing, I got down to raw fiberglass, and I didn't have to sand off very much. Not very much of it had delaminated at all. So it ended up being an area of about maybe a volleyball, a little bit smaller than that. So I use US Composites epoxy. I use their 2-to-1 ratio mixture between their base and then their hardener. They've got different ones based upon what temperature it is and how fast you want it to cure and that kind of stuff. US Composites, I have found, is the most cost-effective epoxy that I've been able to find on the market. At least it was as of 3 years ago when I purchased this epoxy. And the fiberglass that I use, it has a number, but I can't remember what that number is. Excuse me. But it does have the roving and the matte together. So even though I only applied one layer of fiberglass. It is actually 2 layers of fiberglass that were put on there. And I didn't need anything more. This was not a structural repair. It's just I just wanted to make sure that no more delamination occurred in that area. After allowing the fiberglass patch to cure overnight, I came back the next morning and sanded it down. In between each sanding stage, I always wipe down the area with acetone. That's just to remove any sanding fines, to clean it up, get any paints or barrier coats off of there. And just a word to the wise, if you are going to be using acetone to clean stuff for anything longer than like 10 seconds, don't use nitrile gloves like I was. It'll actually eat through those gloves pretty quickly. Now, I was just spot touching a very small area, so it wasn't an issue. But if you do wear those gloves in an acetone environment for, you know, say 3 or 4 minutes, it will eat right through those gloves. So wear some thicker rubber gloves. But that aside, after sanding down the patch, I was ready to fair it. So to make a fairing compound is just a phenolic microballoons mixed in with epoxy, and it's some sort of an organic molecule. It's just extremely lightweight. I don't know if it's like a diatomaceous earth or something like that. I'm not exactly sure what makes up the microballoons that you add into your epoxy, but I made the smallest batch that I could. I knew I wouldn't need much, but since my metering pumps or doses are in pumps, to get the mixture correctly, I did 2 pumps of the base and then 1 pump of the hardener, and then I added my microballoons. And yes, I should have been wearing a mask, you know, a respirator mask, but the wind was blowing pretty stiffly that day, so I knew, because those microballoons, if the air is stagnant, those things will fly everywhere. But it was pretty windy that day, so I knew any that came out were going to get blown away and wouldn't get up in my face. So, you know, I choose to live dangerously, and I didn't wear a mask. But you should, definitely, when you're doing that kind of stuff. And so to make a good fairing compound, you have to mix in a higher amount of the microballoons than what you think you would, a deceptively high amount, and you keep mixing it in. You don't want it to be runny. You want it to be thick, like cake batter. And you want it, you know, if you're stirring it up with a stir stick, you want it to stick to that stir stick. Or more like, not even cake batter, more like cake frosting. You want it to be thick and light and fluffy. And if it's light and fluffy, it makes it easier to sand. The wetter it is, the harder it will be to sand when you come back to sand it after applying the fairing compound. But you don't want it so dry that it's crumbly either. So it's, you know, it's kind of a dark art. You know, it has to be moist enough to stick, but you don't want it too moist that it runs and then it gets over hardened and is hard to remove. So it's kind of a, you know, cake frosting, that consistency seems to be the best. It's easy to sand, it sticks on a vertical surface, it doesn't run, and I've always had good luck mixing it up to that consistency. Applying the fairing compound is straightforward. You're just smoothing over the area, so the fiberglass does have a rough texture to it, so you want a big wide trowel. You want to smooth it over, so once you're done fairing it, you will sand it down again to get rid of any high spots, but you want it to take on the shape of the hull, and the fairing is just to make it so there isn't an obvious repair there. It's kind of like, you know, putting Bondo on your car or whatever, and it's just to make the area nice and smooth and look better. After allowing the fairing compound to cure overnight, I came back the next morning and sanded that down as flush as I could to try and match the rest of the hull. The idea is to make the patch invisible, right? It should blend in. I don't know how well I did. I did some close-up shots from different angles here at the end. You guys can be the judge of how well I did. But after sanding down the fairing compound, I gave it a wash with acetone quick, and now it was a time to apply the barrier coat. Now the barrier coat is an epoxy barrier coat. I went with Interlux Interprotect 2000E. I think that's a pretty standard barrier coat that most sailboats use. So it is an epoxy base, so you do have to mix it. It's 3 parts of the base to 1 part of the activator, and after you mix it, you do have to allow it to sit for 20 minutes before you apply it. I don't know if there's like some polymerization that happens during that process. some cross-linking that happens between, you know, chains or whatever. So chemically, something is happening during that 20 minutes, and then after that, you can apply it. So there are finite windows between the barrier coats, so it's kind of important. Depending upon the temperature, you have so many hours to apply your barrier coats on top of each other, and this is all laid out in the instructions for the Interprotect. So it's quite long at high temperatures, but so I ended up applying 2 coats of the barrier coat, and I didn't film both coats going on because it's kind of the same thing over and over again. But the most important thing is there's a very, very small window after you apply your final coat of barrier coat, whether you decide to do 2, 3, 4 coats. Some websites recommended that you do 4 coats, which seems a little bit excessive. I think that must be Interlux that's the seller of the chemical that's telling you to do 4 coats, but I went with 2. And then after you apply the second coat, there is a very small window where you can apply your first coat of bottom paint. If you're outside of that window, the adhesion between your barrier coat and your bottom paint won't be very good, or won't be as good as it could have been. So for the temperature that it was that day, after I applied my second coat of barrier coat, I had between 3 and 6 hours later to apply my first coat of bottom paint. So make sure when you're applying your final coat of barrier coat that you're aware of the time window that you've got to apply your bottom paint, and if you do so, you'll get good adhesion between your barrier coat and your bottom paint. So all in all, it was a pretty quick, easy repair. You know, it did take, I don't know, 4 or 5 days, something like that. I did have to dodge some rain here and there. So all in all, it was a pretty easy repair. This process is pretty straightforward. It wasn't anything too complex. So you know, it's just one of those monkey wrenches that gets thrown in at the last minute that you didn't quite anticipate. So, what would life be without a little adventure? I guess that's it for this week. I hope you all are well. And that's all we have time for this week. I would like to give a massive shout out to my Patreon crew. Without your guys' support, I wouldn't make these videos. And my Patreon crew is Joan and Juddy Judnick, Val and Chris Alcorn, Denise and Eli Sackett, Sherry Erickson, Deb Shaw, Matthew Spotton, Peter Allen, and Natalie Linehan. Thank you guys so very much. Your support really means the world to me. I do have one legacy patron member, and her name is Joan Linvo. Unfortunately, she has passed on, but she lives on in our hearts forever. We really miss you, Joan. If you are interested in joining our Patreon crew, there is a link in the description down below, and that'll take you to our Patreon page where you can sign up. And there are hundreds, literally hundreds of extra videos and photos of our travels, and I try and keep everything there up to date and post at least once or twice a week, so it gives you a little peek behind the curtain. If you do like our videos, please like, comment, and subscribe. That'll help us out more than you'll ever know, and that actually doesn't cost you anything, so hit that like button. Alrighty, I hope you all are well, and we'll see you next week.